Hi, I'm Mike Frazier, Police Chief for the City of Surprise and President of the Arizona Association of Chiefs of Police. Providing information about victims' rights is an important step in keeping victims safe and holding offenders accountable. Victims are more likely to help move their case through prosecution when they know and understand how they can take action.
Hi, I'm Steve Campbell, Police Chief for the City of El Mirage and Chair of the Maricopa Association of Governments Regional Domestic Violence Council. Many victims are not aware of these rights until law enforcement explains them on a scene of a crime. It's the responsibility of the officers to ensure victims are provided with information about what their rights are and how they can go about exercising them. Informing victims of their rights opens the door to their participation in the criminal justice process.
Upholding victims' rights not only benefits victims, it also helps us in law enforcement. Victims who are knowledgeable about their rights are more likely to participate in the criminal justice process and hold the offenders accountable. This means safety for the victims and our communities while saving time and money for law enforcement agencies.
As member of law enforcement, we need to be consistent in how we provide this information to victims. We also need to be diligent in completing the victims' rights paperwork that is used throughout the criminal justice process. This information is crucial to ensuring the success of engaging victims during the investigative and prosecution phases. In this video, we will go over how to complete victims' rights documentation and why this information is vitally important to our work in keeping victims safe and holding offenders accountable.
We will begin with an introduction from Steve Twist. Steve serves as General Counsel of the National Victims Constitutional Amendment Network and was formerly the Assistant Attorney General for Arizona. He is nationally recognized for his work on victims' rights legislation in our state and across the country.
During most of Arizona's statehood, crime victims had become treated just like another piece of evidence when they went through the criminal justice system. And by the end of the 1980s, this had become a tragic reality for the victims of horrific crimes in our state. It had particularly become difficult for victims of domestic violence. When you stop and think about a woman who's been through the most impactful events of her life, and she is not allowed to be informed of the proceedings in her case. She's not allowed to be present at critical stages, including when the person who attacked her might be released from custody. She's not allowed to be present during the trial. She's not allowed to be heard on whether there's a plea bargain going to be entered. She's not allowed to tell the judge what she thinks about the plea bargain before it's accepted, or not allowed to be present at trial or heard at sentencing. These events, which she was not allowed to participate in, were critically important to her life, her future, and the outcome of justice. And yet our system denied to crime victims these fundamental rights, denied them the right to dignity and to be treated with respect throughout the criminal justice process. And the indignities that were visited upon crime victims continued to grow until there was a movement across Arizona. Indeed, we were part of a movement that swept the country, where crime victims and their friends and allies stood up and demanded reform. And so in 1990, the voters of Arizona passed the Victims' Bill of Rights and enacted for the first time in our state's history rights for crime victims to be informed, present, and heard at critical stages, to be treated with respect and dignity and fairness, to be free from intimidation, harassment, or abuse throughout the criminal justice system. And you can imagine how important the establishment of these rights were for victims of domestic violence. Just take an ordinary case, a woman who's the victim of a serial abuser who has the courage to call in and report that abuse, and there's a law enforcement response. Her attacker is arrested, and then for the first time for her to be allowed to be heard on the matter of that person's release and what conditions might be necessary to protect her safety or the safety of her family. These rights, although we don't always protect them in every case, and we've got a big challenge to meet still in making sure that that happens for victims of domestic violence. These rights could be matters of life or death for a woman. And so the reforms have taken hold, and they need to be vigorously enforced, and they need to be respected and understood by law enforcement. Every police officer in the state needs to understand the value of treating victims with respect and dignity, but also giving them information about how to participate in the criminal justice system. It is a constitutional right in Arizona for every victim of domestic violence to be informed and present and heard at the initial appearance of her attacker. Now, we know these are held within 24 hours of a person's arrest, and it's very difficult oftentimes for the system to adjust to the requirements of the 24-hour notice, but it is a constitutional right. And for victims of domestic violence, again, this could be a matter of life or death for her to be able to impart to the judge information that she has about her safety needs and the needs of her family, and for the right conditions of release to be fashioned in order that that safety might be protected, or for that matter for the court to be able to consider that perhaps no release is necessary because there are no conditions of release that could lead to her safety and the safety of her family and loved ones. The ability for officers to inform victims of their rights is a critical part of the criminal justice system now. And it's incumbent on every officer, honestly, to learn and respect the rights of crime victims just as they must learn and be respectful of the rights of those who are accused of crimes. We're all familiar with the Miranda warnings that are part and parcel of the criminal justice system. Victims' rights information should be just as part and parcel of the criminal justice system today. So the history is important, but it's important to live out the meaning of the law, live out what the voters of Arizona intended when they adopted the Victims' Bill of Rights, that victims be treated with fairness and respect and dignity, and that they be afforded a fair opportunity for independent participation in the criminal justice system. These things are critically important if we are to have a society that we can call just.
When law enforcement arrives at the scene of a crime, it is a critical time for the victim. This is the first encounter that they're going to have with the criminal justice system. They may have many questions. They don't know what to expect. They may be in a crisis state. They don't understand that they have victims' rights. It is crucial that the law enforcement officer provide the victims with those rights and open the door to the criminal justice system for that victim. The way to do that is through the provision of the Victims' Rights Request Waiver form. When an officer determines that he has probable cause to believe that a criminal offense has been committed, he should provide the victim with the Victims' Rights Request Waiver form. Today we're going to go over the Victims' Rights Request Waiver form and how to complete it. The officer should start with completing Section 1, which describes the type of contact they're having with the victim. Section 2 will include departmental report information, including the type of crime that occurred, including felony, a misdemeanor, a petty offense, or if it's a domestic violence related issue. Section 3 will provide the victim with information about the suspect. It will describe whether or not the suspect is in custody and whether the suspect is an adult or juvenile. If there is an arrest, this section is very important for the victim. Please be sure that you include information about the initial appearance. The victim has the right to attend and to speak at the initial appearance, which happens within 24 hours of the arrest. If this information isn't included here, the victim can't exercise that right. Section 4 is information about the victim. It is important that it has identified who the crime was committed against and whether or not a lawful representative needs to be identified. A lawful representative should be designated if the victim is a legal entity, which means a corporation or business, if the victim is a vulnerable adult, if the victim is deceased or incapacitated, or if the victim is a minor. Section C is information about the victim and how the victim can be contacted. Please explain to the victim that the information provided here should be an address or an email address where the victim can be contacted in the future. Ensure that they provide a telephone number, including a home or cell or work number where they can be contacted as well. Section D is where the victim will request or waive their rights. It is important that they check one box or the other and then sign the form. If the officer is completing this form by mail or is unable to identify a lawful representative to sign the form, they must check the request waiver exception box that will automatically request those rights for the victim. Notes can be provided here to explain why the exception was completed. Once the form is completed, the victim will be handed this first copy, and the other copies will follow the suspect as the case progresses through the criminal justice system. One copy is for the law enforcement agency to maintain. The other is for the prosecutor's office, another for the jail, and another for the victim witness division. Each of those agencies has responsibilities to provide victims their rights as the case progresses through the criminal justice process. Agencies are unable to provide those rights if this information is not provided to them. If this information is not passed on to those other agencies, they will be unable to provide victims with their rights as the case progresses through the criminal justice system. The victim should be handed the attached pamphlet, which includes valuable information that the victim will need as their case progresses through the system. It is important to note that if you have a domestic violence incident, that there is information on filing protective orders included, and that resources are included as well. Again, please make sure that this is handed to the victim along with the form.
Thank you for taking part in today's training. For more information about the MAG Regional Domestic Violence Council and the Protocol Evaluation Project, please visit the MAG website. For help locating law enforcement and victim advocate services across the state, please visit www.finddvservices.com.